Welcome to the Table Podcast series with Bridget Johnson. Each month, we give you game-changing conversations about K-12 education and leadership. Join us as top educators, field experts, and administrators share actionable strategies to transform your school community. Let's dive in.
Welcome to The Table, the podcast where student-life professionals, educators, and change makers come together to share stories, insights, and ideas for building communities where everyone belongs. I'm your host, Bridget Johnson. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Meera Shah, founder and lead consultant of Trey Education and a great friend to the Roundtable. With over 2 decades as an independent school educator and academic leader, Meera has mentored teachers, overseeing faculty professional growth at a department and all school level, run leadership teams, and led curricular and programmatic change in schools. Through Trey Education, she provides thought partnership and mentorship for academic leaders, facilitates leadership development for department chairs, coaches, teachers, designs teacher mentorship programs, facilitates team retreats, and supports schools with everything from program visioning to schedule optimization to senior administrative searches. She is very busy. Just wanted to say that. But today we're talking about something that sits right at the intersection of leadership and culture and retention. Faculty onboarding. What is it? What it isn't, and why getting it right might be one of the most important things a school can do. Meera, so good to see you. Welcome to the table. How are you?
I'm good, Bridget. Thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely awesome. So we're just going to jump right in. And so, you've spent over 2 decades in independent schools as a teacher, academic, leader, and now consultant. What drew you to this work, and what was the moment you realized schools needed some outside thought partnership?
Yeah, as a department chair, I went from teacher and grade dean to department chair and didn't really have any support. I had support of colleagues, but I never had any training on how to make that transition to middle leadership. And then again, as an academic dean and assistant head for teaching and learning, I was sort of a party of one and didn't have a thought partner, didn't have people to engage in some big thinking with me. And so I'm just delighted that I can provide that to the leaders of schools out there that are trying to hold up these great institutions. So that's what drew me to the work. I love getting to work with school people. I love getting to, I said, I get paid to help people. What's better than that? So
what's better than that? And, it's very similar to, the Dean of Students role, and kind of why I started this work as well, is because you are a party of one. And so, like, who do you get to bounce ideas off of? Some folks you do have as thought partners at your school, but it's also nice to have someone who's kind of outside the school lens who can give you a slightly different perspective. And so I love the work that you do. And so, we talk about, our topic today is onboarding. And so, all of us at some point have been onboarded, whether you work in education or not. And so, we've all been new somewhere, right? And so, can you reflect on the range of experiences you've had being new to a school?
Yeah. I've been new at a couple of schools, and I think I'll just take the two extremes.
Okay.
Being a new administrator, actually, at one school, teacher and administrator. And there was this moment in the new faculty orientation where there was a long table, and the 4 principals were sitting on one side of the table, and a handful of us new folks were sitting on the other side of the table. And Bridget, I am not joking, the handbook was in front of us. And we were through elements of the handbook. I'm like, this is not helping me. What is this? And contrast that with a school that I was at previously, had a multi-day, really sort of high engagement new teacher program that was run not by the principals or the division directors, but was run by other teachers, really where we learned what would it mean to teach and learn at that school. What, we could ask the questions that we needed to ask. We were doing things that modeled the pedagogy of that particular school. So just the difference between sort of here are the policies and protocols approach, all the way to I felt like an engaged, active learner And I knew from go at that second that this other school
Mm-hmm.
that what it meant to be part of the community, what it meant to really dive in with both feet, what it meant to have a team of people, cheering you on. So that really was the difference, and I think that's when I understood, seeing that contrast, that how much it matters to get that right.
It does matter. And funny enough, my experience was I actually had to run new faculty orientation. I didn't even know it as a new faculty. And I was like, oh, that's interesting because I don't know much about this place yet. And yet I'm telling everyone else kind of how to be here. This is awesome.
Yeah, and
Not
I think
really.
well, and what that hits on, Bridget, is this idea of like, what is the purpose of that orientation, or broader picture, what is the onboarding? And it's not, I'm sure you did a great job of getting
Oh,
folks the nuts
thanks.
and bolts they needed in terms of here's the LMS and, the things
Right.
that that were technical that someone could hand to you and then you could pass to someone else. But as you point out, it's hard to get the what does it mean to be a member of the school community? What are our driving values? How do you design an experience for those new folks when you yourself are new?
Yeah,
You don't have those that context. So I'm sorry. I'm
exactly.
sorry that you had to go through that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And so, as we've been talking about, onboarding can mean a lot of different things to different schools, just depends on where you are, from a 1 day orientation to a full year induction program. But how do you define faculty onboarding, and why do you think it deserves, and I know why it deserves a dedicated conversation, but let's talk about that a little bit more too.
Yeah, I think I run a lot of workshops and work with schools on this, and I think the first step is thinking about opening the aperture on what we mean by onboarding. And a lot of times, the analogy I use is, when you get on a plane, the flight attendant gives you the safety talk, and here's where the exits are, and this plane is going to
Yep.
Chicago, or whatever the case is. And a lot of times we think about that as the analogy for those August in-service days, maybe one, maybe two, for the newest hires, being like, here's what you need to know before you take off here. And what I really want folks to do is open that aperture and think about that onboarding as from the moment a candidate first interacts with your school, whether it's a job posting or a conversation, or maybe even potentially some earlier touch points. So
Hmm.
you're beginning the onboarding and that sense of belonging and who we are and how we are from long before they get to campus, before they're even hired, all the way through the point where they no longer are new or feel new. We don't think of them as new. And that, for some folks, that might be a year or two. But really, it's everything from that moment of first contact through the hiring process. I think the hiring process is actually part of onboarding.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And then I think the other thing, a place where we forget, is that there's that moment between the contract being signed and
Hmm.
new faculty orientation that,
It's kind of like
we
a dead period almost.
exactly. And 9 times out of 10, we've got folks who are raring to go. And if
Yeah.
we don't take advantage of that, and there's a lot of ways that schools can, if we don't take advantage of that, then it's a fire hose in August, and boom, here you go.
Yes.
You're lucky you're at a school that has a strong mentoring program or new faculty cohort program. But yeah, so to answer your question, I would say it's the whole range from first contact all the way until you're not feeling new, or people don't see you as new, and you really are kind of part of the community.
Yeah, so I love that, I love that term aperture. And so we talk about this kind of framing issue. And so, how do you get people to kind of open that aperture and see that it is so much more than just paperwork and handbooks and a welcome breakfast? Like, how do you get people to kind of shift their thinking in that?
Yeah. Well, one of the first exercises I do is ask folks, what does it mean if we think about that new faculty orientation as that getting on the plane moment, and we
Hmm.
think about the full journey, where the planning process, like the sort of where we want to go and what kind of trip do we have, is sort of the hiring, and then the pre-flight checks, the getting through security and getting that's the summer, right? This early support. And then
Hmm.
you have, what happens at new faculty orientation. And then the actual flight itself um, is the mentoring program and 1 or 2 years of support. And I guess
Okay.
what I asked to open the aperture is I ask folks, okay, if we take that analogy, what does it mean when we've arrived, right? When that
Mm,
full
I
journey is
like that.
and the plane has landed and this person isn't, new anymore. what does it look like, sound like, and feel like? I asked them to think about, what do you notice about a person who has integrated to your community, who is thriving, who's contributing? What are they doing? What are they saying? What are the behaviors? And so we work backward from that and say, okay, if we want them, and nobody ever says, Bridget, nobody ever says, you know what? I want them to know where the copier is. Well, it's like, so we work back from like what, oh, they're contributing, they're asking questions, they're taking risks, they're connected with their student. Like, if you design backward from what arrival looks like,
Yeah.
you realize that you have a lot of runway to work with when you're supporting new folks.
You really do. And so, the flip side of that, it can really cost a school when it's done poorly, or not done at all. What does that look like on the ground?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we've all been there when it hasn't gone well. Peter Gao is someone who I've collaborated with on this work. He like literally written the book on recruiting and retraining excellent faculty, and he sometimes jokes that it's gone well when you don't have a lot of phone calls from parents in October. But that kind of snarkiness aside, if you don't do it right, you've got people who are new folks who, at worst are a mismatch. Like they
Yeah.
really aligned with the school value. We didn't really help them understand how we do things and why we do things a certain way, whether it's kind of approach to teaching or assessment, all the way to sort of our expectations around behavior for everyone in the community. So if it's a cult, like that's a risk that you're going to have a misalignment. Another
Right.
risk is that you are going to have folks who are like just burning out real quick in that first or second year. It's hard being a teacher. It's hard being new. And to do both is really exhausting. And so, you don't want to burn people out when they get to you. And then the other risk is that you might just be people just might be underperforming if
Yeah.
aren't providing that support, if they don't feel like they can bring their their best selves to work. You're not going to get them engaging in the ways that really is the reason you hired them. So
Right.
I think, and then, it doesn't take much of an extrapolation to say, what are the costs of that? Well, you're going to have, more problems, more turnover, maybe less happy families or students. So it's worth getting right. And I guess the other thing, Bridget, I'll say is, Peter talks a lot about how getting this right is not only a strategic move, but it's really an act of kindness and how we want to
Yes.
be with each other.
Yes.
And I think the other piece there is like, it's actually, it should be a reflection and extension of the values of the school
Sure.
around belonging, or around how we do teaching and learning, or how we provide support and the structures we use. So if we're a school that doesn't have structures and does everything haphazardly, then unfortunately, our reporting is going to reveal that. And so hopefully it's
Right.
representing the best of what a school is.
Yeah, and so one of the things I just want to go back to that you just touched on, because we haven't mentioned this, you talked about kind of all the things about, making sure that you can do your job well, and like, all the kind of technical things, but also like we talk a lot about belonging for students. If a faculty member is new, and they don't feel connected to the community, they don't feel like that they belong, that's also an issue too. And so we don't think about that. People can be lonely at their schools when they're new. And so I feel like there's a lot of discussion around students, feeling connected and feeling like they belong. But how much do we talk about adults feeling like they connect and they belong?
Not enough. And I would add that, there's two layers to that. One is just forget the school environment, just as a work environment. The research will bear out that belonging is like a critical factor to success and thriving at work in general. And then on top of that, you throw in the fact that schools are places where people are often looking for and excited about the community aspect. They're not coming in to be like, oh, I'm going to crank out some widgets today. It's about people. It's about connection. It's about being part of something bigger than yourself.
Right.
And so if that belonging isn't there, that's a challenge for those reasons. But it's also a challenge because I think it makes it harder for people to ask for help. And
Yes.
and I'm thinking about an example of I was facilitating a conversation among folks from different schools. And it wasn't about, the conversation wasn't about being new. It was folks that with the same particular role at a bunch of schools.
Okay.
And, at one point, one of the members kind of broke down in tears.
Oh, no.
She happened to be new at her school.
Mm-hmm.
And she was just finally able to share the weight of not wanting to make a mistake, not wanting to, not wanting to be seen. Like, they hired her. She didn't want to show any vulnerability. I can't imagine that she felt like she belonged if she was also holding that weight. And, you know, it was sad from an emotional perspective, but from a leadership perspective, here you have this great person that you hired that is not able to operate on all cylinders because she's so afraid of making a mistake or looking a certain way. So belonging is so important for 100 reasons.
It is. And so I love that you touched on that so that we could kind of bring that to the forefront. And so, you designed and facilitated teacher mentorship programs as a part of your work. What makes a mentorship component of onboarding actually work?
Yeah. Well, there's a number of elements. So one is that it's a school gets really clear on its purpose. And so, you and I have had conversations about, for example, advisory. Like, schools need to get real clear about what is the purpose of advisory and then design back there. Same thing. I mean, shouldn't surprise anyone. Same thing with a mentoring program. Is the purpose of the mentoring program really about having a mentor just, show the ropes and provide the nuts and bolts? Is the purpose supporting the new teacher at an instructional level? Is the purpose of the mentor to support the thriving and, as you said, belonging of the new person? These are actually three different things. And I would encourage schools to think about the third as really the optimal place to be, not to necessarily have a mentor as someone who's responsible for the teacher's instructional success. But so I think number one, getting clear on purpose. Then two, making sure that there's structures for that mentorship. That's training the mentors. Working with another adult is really different than facilitating learning for children. And so folks should get training on that. Just like you and I have talked about, advisory is not the same as teaching. We need mentors. We should also provide mentorship training. And I think then resources. So don't let all the mentors kind of do whatever they want at any point in the year. Say, hey, it's this here. We know that these are the kinds of topics that you might want to address with your mentee and so forth. And then provide the structure of time. I mean, whether it's, a really easy example is if you have two teachers, the mentor teacher and the new teacher, actually point out in the schedule, you both have B block free. And so in your schedule, we're actually going to put B block.
How about that?
Just as opposed to just like catch each other when you
figure it out.
Exactly. And, a lot of schools do a nice job of having a new faculty cohort and protecting time for that. But it's often a time that's puts teachers in conflict. Like, they're now having to choose between coaching or the new faculty meetup, or so it's really locking in those times and then protecting them. And I think then the other piece I would say there is making sure that there's clarity on the role, which is to say, the mentors, are they what amount of confidentiality are they meant to hold with the new teacher?
That's a good question.
And if the new teacher is struggling, does the mentor go to the department chair, the division director, or do they hold that in confidence and provide support? So getting real clear on how safe that space is. And making sure it's not unidirectional, right? I think there's a misunderstanding sometimes that mentors are meant to have the answers and support the newbies, and it's of one-way support. And part of that piece of belonging that we were talking about before is really allowing the new folks to contribute the expertise and perspectives they have. So the new person should be visiting the mentor's classroom and offering feedback and giving their perspectives on certain school priorities and so forth. So just really making sure that it's a relationship that has a clear purpose and a clear structure and is very intentional. None of that should surprise you, but those are things that we look
No, it's super important. I think it's important that people hear this, and because you just mentioned the word relationship, right? And so I don't think we've actually said that word up until this point. We talked about belonging and making sure that's important, but building relationship between the school and the community and the folks on campus is should be priority. But I don't know if that's what people are thinking about when they are hiring new teachers and onboarding. And so, but also, schools are wildly different in size and mission and culture and resources. And so some people just think about onboarding, all right, I'm going to just kind of get this checklist and I'm going to do the thing. How do you help schools think about designing onboarding that's responsive to their school context and not just providing just a generic framework? I mean, I think we've talked about it a little bit already, but I feel like it's important to kind of go back to that piece
Mhm.
because I think some people will think, well, we've got an onboarding program, we've done it. I don't need to kind of spend time with that. I got a ton of other of things to do on my list. I, I don't need to kind of think about this in that way. What do you say to schools who just say, we've got it. Onboarding's good. Um,
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to the first thing you said, which is like touching on that word relationships. And I think
mhm.
when you talked about that onboarding maybe as a checklist, relationships are not a checklist. And so
That's
thinking
correct.
about designing again, from the very hiring process, how does a hiring process invest in relationships? How are we, I'll give you an example of, when new students are touring a school, oftentimes there's a sign that say, "Welcome,
Welcome,
Bridget."
new
Like,
students.
like,
Yes, come on in.
school, right? And why don't we do that with our candidates? Why don't we, reach out and make sure they have everything they need before they teach their demo lesson and say, "Hey, do you want to, can we give you not just, can I give you some pictures of the classroom?
Yeah.
Do you want to see some materials of what we've been working on?" Just like really extending that white glove, not
Mhm.
because we're, because that's how we should be with everyone in our community, and really building those relationships from the hiring process, and then again over the summer, whether it's like, yeah,
Yep.
put that teacher on the team, the departmental text group. If you're all someone's saying we're going out to pizza, like that person can at least know that they're welcome, and then in that group they can say like, oh my gosh, hey, first day of school, is this like a shirt and tie kind of thing, or is this like a jeans and t-shirt kind of thing? Like there's this place to ask that, because those relationships have been designed for
Mhm.
over the summer and earlier. And then of course in the orientation, we're not looking at a handbook, we're doing things to build relationship and belonging. So that, I just wanted to circle back to that word that you mentioned.
No, I think it's important, and
Yeah.
so we need to kind of think more about relationships on campus.
And then to your second part of that question was, how can a school get it right for their own school? um, I think one thing we've already talked about, which is that backward design. Like, what does success look like? What does arrival look like? What are the people who are most engaged and thriving here doing? And then how do we make that possible for them? What supports are needed? But then also to say, what do we know has been working or not working? So where are
Mhm.
we going back to our new hire, even just after the hiring process, getting their feedback on what worked about that, what didn't work, what felt great, what didn't feel great, before they even get to campus, getting their input on the hiring process. How powerful would that be? And then, of
Yeah.
course, after the new faculty days, getting feedback, getting input, having those, the school that I mentioned that did this really well, the people who ran it were teachers who had been at the school a couple of years, so they were close to what it was like,
Like to be new, right?
be new and to be new at that school. So if you are having teachers as part of the leadership of inducting newer members of your community, then that's one way to get it right for your school,
Yeah.
as opposed to, here's a template, here's a recipe. So one, designing backwards um, from your intended outcomes. Two is really just asking people for their input, their feedback. Three is using the folks that are, the near peers, will
Mhm.
help get it right for your school. And then maybe the other thing I would add that would help schools get it right for their own situation is, when I do this workshop with folks, I've got a lot of design principles that I share, but everyone's going to
Yep.
have to design what's right for their school.
Sure.
So there is no one size fits all. But the other piece that I would add is to make sure that the orientation, the mentoring program, the summer support, all of it is very intentionally aligned to the other practices you have at your school.
Right.
So as an example, if you have a school value around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, how does your hiring process actually reflect that?
Mm-hmm.
So an example would be a hiring process that affirms the identity or identities of every candidate and says something like, hey, is there an identity that you have that you'd like to meet with other people at the school who have that identity and just see what it's like to
be here.
Get here, and whether it's like a single parent or a non-native born person or a person maybe with a some sort of learning difference, or like whatever the case may be, that person can disclose and say, here's part of my identity I'm curious about. And then, oh my gosh, you get to meet with people at the school and see what it's really like to be, have that identity at the school. So that's a way of demonstrating a value in hiring, but also in the orientation process, the induction, the mentorship process. If your school has a portrait of an educator, how are those pillars integrated? If your school has a certain practice around professional development, growth, and evaluation, whatever you're doing there, how are those pieces incorporated? Not as a let me tell you how we do it, but let's actually experience these 4 pillars of our school, and we're going to structure your the induction process around maybe these 4 pillars. So I think those are all ways that schools can really be intentional about how do we do it for our school, for our people.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, one of the things that we talked about kind of early on is kind of being that one-of-one or being a part of a group that doesn't kind of get as much attention or shine as maybe some other folks. And I feel like one of those, in addition to dean of students, is department chairs. And so I know you work a lot with department chairs, and they're a distinct leadership group. They have a certain set of responsibilities no one else has on campus. And so how does onboarding play out at the department level? And what advice do you give to department chairs that help them to take real ownership of this in a way that complements what's happening at the school in general?
That's right. And I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier about clarity. What is the role of the mentor? What is the role of the department chair? What is the role of the principal or division director? Just so people know who should be helping the new person in which ways. And oftentimes, there's some overlap. Maybe the mentor is the department chair, and that can make a ton of sense. Again, important to be clear, is the department chair also the supervisor? And how do you want to feel those parts? So there's pieces there that just need to have clarity and definition. But with the department chair, I think they're the folks who are seeing this faculty member probably most often. They probably share department space or have like classrooms in the math wing or what have you. So really the department chair can be critical in helping the new hire get it right in the classroom. So what is the instructional design in this discipline at this school? What are some of the, I was a science teacher and a science department chair. So for example, when I was a science chair, I was at a school that had a very particular approach to science instruction. So it was my job to make sure that the new people didn't just know where the copier was and didn't just feel like they belong, all very important things, but also could move our program forward and do their best work in the classroom and with students. And some of that, as I mentioned, is the instructional design work, the assessment development, the resource curation. Some of it's the feedback to new teachers about their instruction practice. Most department chairs are getting into classroom. They're giving instructional coaching feedback. But it's also making sure that the new person is well supported in the kinds of conversations that they need to have with students, whether it's around a grade or around placement, or sure what are the boundaries about how much support we provide and don't provide, what are the expectations there, all the way to working with a parent. So having the department chair know the teacher's practice, be able to provide backup, be able to provide guidance, because even if you have someone who's new to teaching, that's really important. The role of the department chair is essential because really they're learning to be new at the school.
Right.
They're
And
really developing their
learning
teaching.
to be a teacher. Hmm.
But even if you have an experienced teacher who's come from a different school, even another independent school, getting it, how we teach science here, how we work with families here, is different. And so
Yeah.
the department chair is, I think, is really well positioned to get that instructional mentorship going.
Gotcha. Great. And so, we've been talking about onboarding, and you've actually talked about how important it is for it not to just be kind of like for the first year. Sometimes I think it's for the semester. Like, I think once people are kind of gotten over the new faculty orientation, and I don't know if people see them as new as much anymore. And so, what should years 2 and 3 look like for faculty, and how does it connect back to how they were brought in? Because I think that's really important in terms of continuity and having people feel like they're connected.
Yeah, I remember when I was new at the very first school I worked at. So, like, Bridget, as green as can be.
Yeah.
And I remember I was also, because this is what we do to new people, and I think we need to stop. But it's like, you're going to teach this class, you're going to teach this other class, you're going to coach this thing, you're going to
all the things, all the things.
What Peter calls cannon fodder. Like, we just, not okay. But I remember one of my co-deans at the time said, if you're new, you just smile and nod when you don't understand, but also you get to be new here for like 3 to 5 years. And I think he was joking. He was sort of like saying, playing on the idea that you can play the new card for a while. But
right.
Even though he said it tongue in cheek, I think there is something to, as you said, it's not just that first week in August. It's not just the semester. You have to go through the whole cycle of the school year.
Right. Yeah. To understand how that place works.
Yeah. And then, and then in the second year, the support to go from survive to thrive. So I think getting new second year teachers or, folks who are in their second year at your school to still engage in some sort of structured support. So an example would be, maybe you set up your mentorship program not to be a one-to-one relationship, but to be a pod sort of situation where you have an experienced mentor, and then you have someone who's in their second year and someone's in their first year. So now that second year person is giving back while they're learning, and they still have that other mentor that they can still ideate with and get some support.
Yeah.
Another example would be, I've worked with a school that they gave their newest hires in the upper school no advisory responsibility for the first semester. And I can't emphasize enough, anything you can do to lighten the cognitive load of your new hires in that first semester or first year. Don't give them the 4 preps if you can avoid it. Can you take off a duty assignment? Can you something to give them the bandwidth to do a good job? So this school didn't have folks advise in the first year. Also, to your example, Bridget, of like, how can you advise new students?
You're new.
What? So they give their first folks their folks a pass on the first semester of advising. Then they shadow their mentor's advisor group for the second semester.
Oh, interesting.
See how it's done. And then in their second year, they get an advisory group, but they still have the support of folks about how to do the advising well, because that's
great.
So I do think that schools can think about a year 1 and then a year 2 and see how those two pieces connect. And again, as I mentioned before, having those year 2 people help with the support of the new folks, whether it's in new faculty orientation, whether it's in a mentorship pod, whatever the case may be, is a way not only of respecting their experience, but also getting their perspectives and continuing to invest in their growth. So and take it beyond the year if you can.
I think it's super important to be able to do that. And that just gives, that keeps connecting people in a way that I think is super important. And so being able to do that intentionally, I think is awesome and really important. So I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. We've been talking about onboarding, and, the hot topic, I think it's always been a topic, is just retention for teachers and burnout and teacher development. And so we know we've talked about how a strong onboarding foundation is important, but also let's connect that to longer term professional development, professional growth, because I think they kind of go in some ways hand in hand. And so, what in your mind? What's the handoff between onboarding and ongoing professional development?
Yeah, I think it depends to a degree on the school, which is
Okay.
to say, different schools have different structures and practices around professional development or around the professional growth. You know, some schools have the, hey, we're going to support you in whatever kind of conferences you want to do, like kind of a little bit of a Wild West
Yep.
approach. And some schools say, like, okay, we're going to move you through a 3-year cycle where you go from a reflection year to a learning year to an action research year. And then so, you know, new folks might plug in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it depends on what the school's structures are for professional growth, where folks fit into that. I would definitely not saddle your new folks with moving through a full whatever your most full cycle is. Some folks have that in rolling years. I have my own. We can have a separate conversation about my opinions about how to do faculty growth and review well, but that's a different.
Okay. Yep. That's a different conversation. Fair enough. We'll
But
pin that.
I will say, like, just recognizing that what a new person needs in terms of their professional growth is
Mm-hmm.
different than what they're going to need in 2 years or in
Right.
10 years. And so, in the same way that we differentiate things for students, can we differentiate things not just for new folks, but really, I would say across the board on the growth work? So. So folks are getting what they need, and I actually that reminds me, Bridget, just going back to the onboarding and early support, one thing that
Mm-hmm.
folks forget is that everyone coming to your school is really different. Yes, they have
Yeah.
one thing in common, which is they're all new to your school, but some of them are experienced teachers. Some of them are, you know, new to independent schools. Some of them are local. Some of them have moved from really far. Some of them have strengths in instruction, but have weaknesses in other areas. Like I,
Mm-hmm.
we do a good job thinking about the jagged profile that students present. I think we can do that with our newest hires as well, and then think about providing the right supports and the right program. So it's not meant to be a one size fit
So
all. That
it's all right.
we're all sort of receiving the same orientation. I
Right.
don't. If I've come from a school that uses the same exact LMS, why don't you give me a swim test where I can show you what my how I know how to use the LMS to the
Yeah.
specifications of this school, but don't make me sit through a 90-minute training on it.
I
Uh,
could do
so
some
I
other
think,
things.
oh, yeah, exactly. But but going to your point about you know, how do we connect this to the larger growth piece? Um,
Mm-hmm.
it really, to me, it's all about having some clear guiding principles and clear systems. And so, if you don't have a clear sort of philosophy around faculty growth, you don't have clear systems to support faculty growth, you don't have a culture of a learning a community of adult learners.
Mm-hmm.
Try and build that at the same time so that your new faculty support is just an outgrowth of
Of
that is. If you're doing PLCs, how do you think about PLCs being your new folks integrating into their own PLC or to be part of an existing PLC? So you can be really thoughtful about how this work connects to that bigger work.
that bigger work. And so you just said something that triggered a question for me that I actually hadn't really thought about until now. You know, faculty growth and people moving up or being promoted within the faculty within their school. Have you had much conversation with folks around what sort of onboarding or support that those folks need? They're not new to the school, but they're new to their position.
That's
What's your
right.
take?
Well, my take is right now I'm actually developing for two different associations this middle leaders toolkit for folks that are making the transition often from a classroom setting uh,
Mm-hmm.
to whether it's a department chair, grade dean, dean of students, dean of faculty, academic dean, something where you're sort of still maybe one foot in the classroom, but
Mm-hmm.
you are also now overseeing program, overseeing people. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so shaping culture. And so I
Yep.
think, I guess I would say two things. One is, um, there's programs out there where folks can go and get trained
Yep.
at that middle leadership level, and schools should definitely be supporting anyone at that transition. I would also say that schools can do a good job or do a better job of building the leadership pipeline. So instead of saying, "Oh, we need a new science department chair," hey, you, uh, what can we do to be building those capabilities?
Being intentional about it. Yeah.
Understanding where do people want to grow in
Yeah.
years, and how can we support you in that and get you at the table in certain conversations so that you can get some experiences. So I think that's another thing. And then you're making me wonder now as we're talking, is there a way that schools could do some sort of within their school a cohort of new leaders if they have a lot of them?
If they have enough,
Yeah. But certainly providing, if you have a new department chair, giving that person a little bit more mentorship, and explicitly so saying, not just the division director or the associate head saying, "I'm here to help you," but saying, "Listen, you're new to this role. There's a good chance you have never held a budget before. Let me help you with that. There's a good chance you've never had to have a difficult conversation with a colleague about their performance before. Let's talk about that." Making it really clear that that new person doesn't need to magically know how to do it all.
Right.
So yeah, I would encourage schools to think about that.
Absolutely. And I think more often than not, people kind of fall into that trap. Oh, they'll be great at it. Not thinking about kind of the other implications in terms of, no, I haven't had a real leadership position. I hadn't had to lead my peers who are my friends. Now that I'm, it's not even, sometimes they're not even direct leadership. It's like a dotted line, which is even more complicated, right?
Yeah.
And so thinking about all of those things and the stress that comes with that, and being, who do you talk to about all that? Because you're now supposed to be a leader. You're supposed to have it all together, right? And so there's so many things kind of around that. So that just popped into my head. And so I'm like, let me just see how Mira feels about that. Because I was just really curious.
I'll say that I've been lucky, Bridget, that I've been at schools where I've been allowed to grow at that school, but I've also, just as it's turned out, made my biggest leadership jumps as I've moved schools. And so what that has meant is no one at that new school knew me when I was 22-year-old. And it's a lot harder to go from, you knew me when I was a brand new teacher and now I'm the division director, like all those steps in between. They're hard. They're really hard to do.
They are hard. So Mira, as we think about closing, and for the academic leader or head of school listening right now who wants to revisit or redesign their onboarding program, where do they even start? Now they're like, oh, good Lord, now another thing I got to add to my list. So what's the first thing they need to do?
Well, the first thing they need to do is take a deep breath because I worked with one administrator who wanted to do all this work. And she was like, "Oh, I got to give this, and I'm going to develop a month-by-month plan, and I'm going to develop training." I'm like, you know what? Let yourself believe that you're in year 0. You're not even in year 1. Like, give yourself the grace to say, this is year 0, and it's going to be a multi-year process to build it up. So I guess I would say, think in terms of timeline as opposed to just like immediate transformation. I would say also, my biggest advice, actually, and it's great that you're here because you have the expertise here. My biggest advice for school leaders here is don't try to just think about your faculty onboarding. We've talked about how it's part of a bigger aperture, but also connected to other things in the school.
Yep.
The biggest place that leaders can look is what are they doing right with students? Schools, by and large, are doing a better job with welcoming new students than they are with their adults. And so school will take care of its students, make sure there's a buddy program, make sure that older student is writing a note to the newer student over the summer. That new kid has swag before they ever show up on campus. That new kid has, there's the ninth grade orientation absolutely is not going through a handbook. It's all about relationships and connection and, getting excited. And so,
right.
I guess if there was one simple piece of advice, a place to start is look to what you're doing right with students. And then, of course, talk to your faculty, talk to the new hires, get their experience. And if people are looking for a framework, I just posted some resources from the workshop that I run on this. I made a condensed version and put a
Okay.
couple of slides just on the Trey Education website blog. So check that out, or people can shoot me an
Wonderful.
email and I'll send those over.
Perfect segue into my last question. So for someone who's like, oh, I didn't know about Trey Education, sounds like she's got some great tools going on there. How can they connect with you? What's the best way to start?
Yeah. Well, people can shoot me an email. So it's Meera, MEERA, @treyeducation.com, or jump on the website and fill out the form there. Or, hit me up on LinkedIn. I have a policy that if anyone tries to connect with me on LinkedIn, I actually write them back and say, let's meet on Zoom for 15 minutes before I hit accept.
Oh, look at you. Okay.
I just want to be in community and relationship.
I like it.
So
I like it.
not that way, you're guaranteed, but we'll have a conversation whether you like it or not.
Actually, we're going to build those relationships, right?
That's right.
Meera, thank you so much for being here today. This has been a fabulous conversation. Talking about faculty onboarding is really important. And it's why, it's really a leadership, culture, and belonging conversation. And we've touched on all those points today. And it's the exact kind of thinking that every person at the table needs to carry back to their school. And a good time to start thinking about that because, this is the hiring season. And so you've got a longer runway to kind of think about how you're ushering those new folks onto your campuses. And so you've given a little bit of a blueprint on that. And I like the analogy of flying the plane or taking the trip. So I think that's a great way to think about it.
Onboarding is starting right now.
It's starting right now. Absolutely. So grateful for your experience and your generosity, everything that you brought to the conversation today. And so like Meera said, if you want to learn more about her work, you can head over to Trey Education and explore all the services that she offers. I'm particularly interested in that middle managers tool. So we'll talk about that later. But we'll include a link to all of her resources in the show notes. And so just a reminder, folks, if you haven't already, following us on Instagram and TikTok, come check us out. Search for Dean's Roundtable on both platforms for leadership insights, community building resources, and conversations that matter to student life professionals. We'd love to see you there. If you're enjoying the table, please subscribe and share it with a friend or leave us a review. It really helps more people find us. And as always, thanks for pulling up a chair at the table today. I hope this conversation gave you something to think about or maybe something to try in your own community. And as always, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time at the table. Have a good one.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Table Podcast Series. Is your student life program delivering on your mission? Our new K-12 student life assessment moves you beyond anecdotes to evidence-based decisions. Through comprehensive stakeholder surveys and expert analysis, you'll get concrete insights across 8 essential dimensions of student life, from culture and wellness to staff effectiveness and resource allocation. We're seeking founding partner schools to be the first to experience this transformative assessment process and help shape the future of student life evaluation. Today's episode was hosted by Bridget Johnson in conversation with Meera Shah, produced and edited by Andrick Sigmund and music by PremiumBeat.com. For any questions, contact information can be found in the episode description. And, as always, thanks again for